Amen. Welcome back. So, we were discussing the revolutionary time periods, really in its two parts, revolution and counter-revolution. Revolution 9/11 to 2019, really 9/11 to 11/9. That process by which the United States establishment was overturned. And then we mark in 2020 the beginning of a counter-revolution. So I left that study to one side and I asked people, what were you expecting to see on November 9? So when it comes to November 9, people had various answers. One of the answers was that that would be when we would see a presidential impeachment. So that's actually one of the things that Elder Jeff attacked us with after November 9, was that the presidential impeachment didn't occur on the day. He would say it didn't occur at all, but that's just a very simple, basic misunderstanding of what an impeachment is. If we were to go back to how that study was developed, it was a really neat study where it actually, I won't draw it up for board work, but where you have 1865. 1865 was the changing from a president who freed the slaves to a pro-slavery president. The death of Abraham Lincoln, the beginning of the presidency of Andrew Johnson. So 1865 plus 151 takes you to 2016. The end of Obama, who was for equality, and the beginning of Donald Trump, who was against equality. So you can see the 151 also in this same context explain 2016 and that process. But then you can also see 3 years later, 1868, Andrew Johnson, he has favoured the South to such a degree. He has fired someone he shouldn't have. He's violated he's misused his power as president, and they try to impeach him. 1868 plus 151 takes you to 2019. So it's a neat study that explains more than 2019 and that impeachment. It takes you back to 1865 and shows you the change in these presidents. But that study never linked to November 9. It had no link. I don't believe that link was ever made in a presentation. So there was a misunderstanding where some people thought that impeachment should happen on November 9. But in 1868, Andrew Johnson's impeachment is not on November 9. So we have no link for that. So I would suggest that could never have been the event of November 9. The study that gave us November 9 is the one behind me. It's the story of the revolutions. So when we think about the revolutions, what's the context? What's the theme? I'll take us back to the World Wars. Thank you, Brother Marcel. That's neat. I'll take us back to the revolutions. Sorry, not to the revolutions, to the World Wars. If we were to look at World War I and World War II, how many fronts do they exist on? There is an Eastern Front and a Western Front. The Eastern Front in World War III, the one we're tracing our history through today, who's fighting in the Eastern Front? two, Eastern and Western. Who's fighting in the Eastern? Russia and the United States. Who's fighting in the Western? Where's this Western fight taking place? United States. The United States versus the West, and the United States is part of the West. So in many ways it's the United States versus the United States, which is what? When you have a country against its own country. Civil war, yes. So this is civil war. So when we do the study of the revolutions, are we speaking about the Eastern Front or the Western Front? Western. The studies of the revolutions, which gave us November 9, is a study of what is happening on the Western Front of World War III. So for those that said that they would expect a win by Russia, we'll come back to that in a moment. But is everyone okay now that this is Western Front? November 9 is a Western Front subject. Internal to the United States. People are saying yes. No one has said no so far. So when we look at November 9, we have to first understand it's a Western Front subject, not Eastern Front. Now I want to put a spanner in that. 1989, that's a battle. It's described as a battle, yes? 1989 is November 9. So one other history that we took to these revolutions. And we said 1989, 2019. 1989 was a battle between the United States and the Soviet Union. 2019 is a battle between the United States and Russia. November 9, 1989. November 9, 2019. Can you see the difficulty we're in? Does that make sense? Someone wrote yes twice. I think they really see it. Sister Alison, you says yes. So we've agreed that that is a subject of November 9 is a subject of the Western Front. Civil War, the United States versus itself. Then we went back to 1989. Raphia is a battle in Daniel 11, 1989 is a battle in Daniel 11, and 1989 is November 9. So I want to suggest the way that I view this. 1989, change your mindset for a moment. You're no longer a citizen of whichever country you come from. To keep it simple, you're no longer a citizen of the United States, because that's the context we're viewing this in. You're a citizen of the Soviet Union. Place yourself in the mindset of a citizen of the Soviet Union. What does 1989 look like to you?
Soviet Union.
I heard a voice. I'm not sure if that was a mistake, but I didn't understand it. Sorry, I'll go back to my question. 1989, place yourself in the mindset of someone who is a citizen of the Soviet Union. Does that make sense, Sister Lana? If we can have all muted, if we could please. I'm sorry, I didn't quite understand you, but if there's something that I'm saying that doesn't make sense, if we could put it in the chat. If we could do that, thank you. So, 1989, you're a member of the Soviet Union. How now do you see November 9? Where is the United States, November 9, 1989? It's not there. What happens on that day? What happens through 1989 is revolutions through the Soviet Union. It's internal civil war. The United States was not there. They didn't make they weren't there themselves forcing the people to break down that wall. They weren't themselves there breaking down that wall. That was happening inside by citizens of the Soviet Union. It was destroyed from the inside. And where was the United States? Not even there. Not even visible. So why is it described as being a battle between the United States and the Soviet Union? Sister Lana's describing 1989, the fall of the Berlin Wall. Soviet Union started falling apart, turmoil and struggle inside the parliament. Someone says because of their prior history. So what do we know the United States had done before 1989? Before 1989, they'd already, through the Afghanistan proxy war, through Voice of America and subterfuge, through working with John Paul II, through the arms race, through all of these different ways, they'd already maneuvered to bring the Soviet Union to its own place of civil war. They had manipulated events surrounding the Soviet Union to cause its own people to rise up against it. Does that make sense? So what you're seeing in 1989 is an internal civil war. It's Soviet Union versus Soviet Union. That's what you see. But you know that the United States played a role in bringing that about. So when we see Western civil war inside the United States, who brought that about? Partly. Who worked through disinformation campaigns? Russia. So on the day do you see them? It just looks like an internal civil war, pure Western front. But you know by the prior history that it has been influenced by Russia, by the King of the South. Does that make sense? So for the people that said before they expected to see Russia on the day, you wouldn't see Russia on the day. But you are correct that you know that Russia has had involvement in that. Trump became president with the help of Vladimir Putin. That change in overthrowing the American establishment happened through Russian assistance to Vladimir Putin, through Russian disinformation campaigns, through the work of GRU, the Internet Research Agency. So, on one hand, from one perspective, this is the Western front of World War III. We're observing through these revolutions the progressive steps of the Western front of World War III, just from another perspective, but the same thing. But it's also equally correct to say that that civil war is the result of influence by the King of the South. Therefore, that internal civil war is a battle between North and South. Just as the internal civil unrest in 1989 was a battle of Daniel 11 verse 40 between North and South. Does that make sense? Can you see how our history is complex? You need these different perspectives to approach the subject. If you just look at it from one perspective, then it will come to the application will be too narrow. You can say it's the Western Front and be correct. You can say it's a battle between North and South, which looks like Eastern Front, and you would be correct. It's understanding that there are these two fronts, looking at both of them, and that both combined. I think what I tried to describe in Brazil last year and did badly is that our lions, they have a component of being three-dimensional. Whiteboards are wonderful. There's still a limit. Our message actually, if we really conceptualize even just this one thing, it's not a two-dimensional subject. You actually start, I wish technology had advanced to that stage, the sci-fi movies where they press a button and you walk in and through your projection. It actually is more of a 3D model than a 2D. And we're working off lines and whiteboards that only give us two-dimensional images. And that's part of the battle we have to work through. When it comes to November 9 last year, is it Western Front? Yes. Is it Eastern Front? Yes, but in a different way. This isn't something visible like the United States and the Soviet Union fighting over Cuba, fighting over a different country, fighting over Afghanistan. It's something that occurs internal to the Soviet Union itself. It is an internal civil war. So there's those two components. There's the fight for spheres of influence that relates to other countries outside the Soviet Union but under their influence. Countries like Afghanistan and Cuba. November 9 relates to what's happening inside the Soviet Union. But because of the influence America has already exerted to cause civil unrest inside the Soviet Union, it is a battle between North and South. It is Eastern Front as well. Our very technically advanced friend suggests virtual reality. I think that's beyond me, but go for it. So I just want to give us that understanding of November 9. I don't have an explanation of November 9. I don't have that to give you. I'll justify that by saying that on the lines we don't. The disciples don't understand the cross for some time. That is our key reform line more than any other. Success of ancient Israel, success of modern Israel. Even when Christ ascends, why are they so disappointed when Christ ascends? It's their increase of knowledge after the cross. Why are they disappointed? If Christ goes back to heaven, how is he going to lead them against the Romans? They're so disappointed at the ascension because they still don't understand what happened at the cross. It's a characteristic of that dispensation. What we need to do is understand what we're supposed to see when we do understand it. It will not relate to the impeachment. It will not relate to anything visible with Russia over external spheres of influence. It's internal to the United States. It's the end point of an overturning of an establishment. I know that that's complex. It's like having a few different points, as I said, three-dimensional. Different perspectives that we need to be able to pick up, look at, put back down. It's Eastern Front and it's Western Front. It's internal civil war, influenced by the enemy. So I want us to briefly look at what else happened in November 9. Sorry, not November 9, but 2019. We should have expected multiple things in 2019. First of all, the restraint of radical Islamic terrorist groups. You'll notice I don't say the restraint of Islam. I think we need to move beyond that terminology. It was the restraint of radical terrorist Islamic groups, ISIS. The defeat of the death of Baghdadi and the full conquering of the Islamic State, all of its territory. The restraint was fulfilled. We would expect to see an impeachment of the US president. Neither event connected to November 9. We saw that occur. So we have the restraint of radical Islamic terrorist groups. Someone has said bin Laden's son was killed as well. Yes, so we have that. That was quite a restraint put upon ISIS, including losing all of the last remnants of their territory. We have the impeachment that we would expect to see. We also have a fight over spheres of influence between the United States and Russia, external to what's happening inside the United States. This fight over spheres of influence was not connected to November 9. So what I want to do in the little bit of, just for a short amount of time, is something I want to do perhaps more thoroughly at another point. This is something that I'd like to do more thoroughly in the coming weeks, but I'm aware that we have a fair bit to learn on this subject. When it comes to Raphia, Raphia was a fight over what country? What territory? In its literal history. It was a fight over Kol Syria. So you had these two generals, north and south, Babylon and Egypt, fighting it out over that territory of Syria. They both wanted to control that external sphere of influence. So when it comes to Raphia, I want to suggest Raphia as a name is more than November 9. Raphia is a fight over external to the civil unrest, external to the revolution, other spheres of influence. That is what Raphia is about. If we could, what I want to do is change my screen so you won't see me. You will hear me, but I want to change the screen to Google Maps, just so we can see a world map. I'm hoping we can all see that now. I'd like to do this more thoroughly at another point in time. I just want to lead us through a little bit of history, why these spheres of influence are so important. You'll remember that last year, what was FFA's position on Raphia? The issue that they have with Raphia is that they cannot look outside of the United States. Sorry, brief technical issue. Because FFA, their whole worldview is so encased in this nationalism, it's so nationalistic, they cannot look and see the importance of events in other countries. This has hindered them being able to see the external events of Raphia. Raphia was a fight over Kol Syria. It was external to Babylon, it's external to Egypt. It's a fight over who controls this strategic region of the world. 2019, there are multiple strategic areas. This is outside of November 9. Raphia was not the day. Raphia was the year. And I want us to see the importance of these spheres of influence. We have discussed before this territory of Syria. I'll just review quickly why this is a place of such strategic importance. If you look down, you have Saudi Arabia and you have Iran. Saudi Arabia and Iran are mortal enemies. Iran is Shia. Iran is Shia, Saudi Arabia is Sunni. It's not just a religious divide, it has become a political issue, because whoever is right in that ideology as it relates to Islam, whichever country or government is right about Islam, that country then has the authority to rule these two areas, Mecca and Medina. These are the two holiest sites in the Muslim religion, in Islam. So if Iran and Shia Islam is correct, Iran says this House of Saud, this government of Saudi Arabia, does not have the religious right to control Mecca and Medina. So this is about legitimacy as a world power, as a government. This is the church-state union that began to come together much more forcefully in 1979. So these are mortal enemies, and these two fight over spheres of influence. So Iran supports Russia. Russia supports Iran. The United States supports Saudi Arabia. And in here you have another country supported by the United States, Qatar, a US ally. So Qatar has access to oil from the Persian Gulf. They wanted to build a pipeline. It would have had to go through Iraq, through Syria, and then into Europe. So for this little country down here, an ally of the United States, to build a pipeline from the Persian Gulf into Europe, it would have to go through Iraq and Syria. Iraq is okay with that. They are quite controlled by the United States by this stage. You don't want to go down through this territory of Lebanon and Israel. There's too much unrest. You need to go through Syria and then through Turkey. Turkey is a US ally when it wants to be. It's acting like a rebel without a cause at the moment. But it wouldn't be a major problem. The problem is Syria, because who is Syria allied to? Iran and Russia. So when Qatar wants to build this pipeline through here, Syria blocks it. This is in the history of 2009 to 2011. Iran also has access to the Persian Gulf. It wants to build a pipeline that will go through Iraq, through Syria, under the Mediterranean Sea, and come out in Europe. Iraq has no problem. Syria now has no problem. Syria has no problem because Iran supports Russia, is supported by Russia. Syria is supported by Russia. They have the same strategic interests. So Iran wanted to build this pipeline. Syria said, that's fine, go ahead. That was around 2010. 1 year later, you have Arab Spring. The Syrian civil war begins. So that is why Syria is such a strategically important location. It was a gateway to all of this territory. Back when Col Syria was a little bit more, I think, north of that, it was a gateway to this breadbasket. It was also the crossroads between Egypt and Babylon, because this was desert. But it remains a place of strategic importance today. If you want to have access from this rich area, rich in natural resources, through into Europe, who wants to use and buy those natural resources from you, the route goes through Syria. So whoever controls Syria controls who gets to send natural resources through to Europe, which is a major amount of influence to have geopolitically. So this is why there was a sphere of influence fought over Syria. I want us to come back out of the subject of Syria and just have us briefly look at a couple of others. We'll come down here, Yemen. So what do we know about Yemen? I'm going to read a little from the Center for Strategic and International Studies. This fellow, I don't agree with his perspective. He writes from a very nationalistic American perspective. But he explains why Yemen is so important. Yemen is a growing reminder of just how important the strategic US partnership with Saudi Arabia really is. This area of Yemen developed into civil war, and it has been controlled by outside proxies from early in, particularly Saudi Arabia and Iran. Saudi Arabia and Iran support different sides in this Yemen civil war. So these two powerful Middle Eastern countries are wrestling it out over who can control Yemen. And I hope we can start to see why this area is of such strategic importance. Particularly through the early days of this war, while America didn't become directly involved, what they did is American planes would take off from their bases up here from where they were bombing in Syria. They would take off from their bases in Iraq. They would fly down into Saudi Arabian airspace. They would meet mid-air with Saudi Arabian fighter jets. They would refuel those fighter jets, and then those fighter jets would fly down and conduct bombing in Yemen on behalf of Saudi Arabia. So that's just one example where the United States was supporting Saudi Arabia in that proxy war over Yemen. The side that was in Yemen, that was on the side of Saudi Arabia and being supported by the United States, the human life lost, the casualties due to that Saudi Arabian bombing were so horrific that Obama, because this happened in the Obama administration, Obama was warned, if you keep supporting Saudi Arabia in this proxy war, the UN will be forced to charge the United States with war crimes. The human casualties were horrific. And if anyone from Europe wants to know why there's refugees flooding up from Yemen, this is one example. It was, at one stage, it was the greatest humanitarian crisis in the world. Millions on the brink of starvation. So Obama had to start to pull back there, but he still supported Saudi Arabia. Of course, Russia supporting Iran and Yemen. Quoting this fellow, he puts Yemen in a broader strategic context. The crisis in Yemen is only part of the US-Saudi strategic equation. So this all relates to this alliance between Saudi Arabia and the United States. At the same time, Yemen is of major strategic importance to the United States, as is the broader stability of Saudi Arabia and all of the Arab Gulf states. down here you have the Gulf of, I think that's Hormuz. This is, this is hugely strategic. You would note I think even the early months of this year, Iran was attacking tankers that went through this. It's something that they practiced in 1997 as well. It's been a practice of theirs that when they want to push for more global influence, when they want to punish another country, they start covertly attacking the oil tankers that are forced to travel out of the Persian Gulf and around this point. So Iran controlling this choke point can cause a great deal of problems for the United States and for US allies. Yemen does not match the strategic importance of that Gulf, but it is of great strategic importance to the stability of Saudi Arabia and to the Arabian Peninsula. Yemen also became the base of Al-Qaeda in the Arabian Peninsula. Then he goes on to describe the strategic importance of this strait here. It's called, if I can pronounce it correctly, just find my place, the Bab el-Mandeb Strait. It's a choke point between the Horn of Africa and the Middle East. It is a strategic link between the Mediterranean Sea, up here, and the Indian Ocean. The strait is located between Yemen and this Horn of Africa. It connects the Red Sea with the Gulf of Aden and the Arabian Sea. Most exports from the Persian Gulf that transit the Suez Canal, they have to pass through here. So if you want to come around here and through and up to Europe, you're going to have to go through this choke point as well. It's 18 miles wide at its narrowest point, limiting tanker traffic to a 2-mile wide channels, two 2-mile wide channels for inbound and outbound shipment. So a 2-mile wide channel for inbound, 2-mile wide channel for outbound. Closure of that area would keep tankers from the Persian Gulf from being able to go through the Suez Canal or Sumed pipeline, having to divert them all around through the southern tip of Africa. Any hostile air or sea presence in Yemen could threaten the entire traffic through the Suez Canal. So when you have these proxy wars, Syria is strategically important, Yemen is strategically important. Moving on to another one, Libya. Libya is a major issue, a major concern. Who messed up Libya? It's fun until it's your guy. This was Obama and Clinton. They overthrew Gaddafi and they messed up that job badly. Since 2011 and the overthrow of Gaddafi, it has just been a brutal civil war. Thousands of people suffering and dying. Again, when you have a refugee crisis, it's also this civil war here. Quickly, the West and Russia took different sides in this civil war. The UN supported, with the US's agreement, a government that they set up in Libya. Moscow supported the rebel commander Khalifa Haftar. So you have Russia supporting this rebel commander Haftar, the UN and the United States supporting this Tripoli government. And they're fighting over this country here. Tripoli is up here. So Haftar, with the support of Russia, controls the vast majority of the country, but the government controlled the capital and this territory up here, which was of particular strategic importance. So over the last years, this has been another fight over spheres of influence. Why does Russia want their guy in charge of Libya? Why do they want Libya? If they get Libya, what else do they get? What was the issue over Afghanistan 79 to 89? This looked different in the history of the Cold War. The Soviet Union came down through much of this territory. So Afghanistan was of strategic importance, particularly because it was called the soft underbelly of the Soviet Union. You don't want an enemy government having influence over your soft underbelly. So what's Libya directly under? If Vladimir Putin has Haftar succeed in Libya, take over the whole country, he has the soft underbelly of virtually the whole NATO alliance. He already has air bases situated in Libya. He has troops on the ground there. He sent in his own covert soldiers, his own drones, his own tankers and bombs. He's already set up air bases, Russian air bases inside Libya in preparation. The strategic importance of that location, beyond the influence of, beyond any wealth or economic deals, is again its location. It divides East and West Africa at this top junction. And Vladimir Putin is also forging ties within Africa, particularly Sudan. But Libya is of such strategic importance because of its coastline of the Mediterranean, and it's directly under the NATO alliance. What was the issue after World War II? Stalin said, we just fought an enemy that forced his way all the way to our doorstep. We need to have some spheres of influence between Germany and the Soviet Union so that we have a buffer zone, like an airbag. If anyone tries to hurt us, we have this airbag here. They're not on our doorstep. Everyone wants an airbag. Was the issue with Afghanistan? It's the issue with Libya. If Ukraine wants to side with NATO, what's Russia's complaint? You're going to bring NATO to the very border of Russia. So what's he going to do? He's trying to do the same thing. Have his influence as close as he can to NATO as well. We'll touch on one more and then we will move on. Venezuela. Venezuela has clearly been a fight for spheres of influence between the United States and Russia. It's partly economic. The economic advantage that Russia has over Venezuela, the deals they've made with President Maduro that greatly favour Russia, the millions that they have loaned for that country, that they won't get repaid unless Maduro stays in power. That's all part of it. But one Russian politician said, if the US wants to come to Ukraine and have a sphere of influence right on our doorstep, we're going to do the same thing to them. Because Venezuela is where? Top of South America. In the Cold War, what was the country that was stressed the United States the most? Cuba. Cuban Missile Crisis. Why was that such a concern? Soft underbelly. Cuba became a major point of tension in the Cold War. The one point where we really could have had a hot nuclear war was because the United States did not want the Soviet Union having a sphere of influence how far from its borders. Venezuela isn't quite as close, but it's about as close as they're going to get. And for the same reasons, it's a strategic sphere of influence. Last year, I won't go into that details for time. When did Venezuela first erupt in protests? 2014. So much of these spheres of influence you can see particularly escalated in 2014. If it's not 2014, it's 2011. Syria, for example. Syria, 2011. It starts, the civil war starts. 2014, America becomes involved in that region. So you have 2011 as important, but 2014 particularly is when these spheres of influences blew up. 2014, protests in Venezuela. The man who led those protests is imprisoned, and another protege of his takes his place, and this is, I'll pronounce his name wrong, Guaido. This is the opposition leader in Venezuela. He took the place of the fellow who was leading the protests in 2014. 2019, that blows open again, and Russia starts sending aid to Maduro. March 23, the same day ISIS collapses, Russian troops arrive in Venezuela. The same day, a tanker arrives as well with particular chemicals that Maduro could not get because of Russian sanctions. He needed certain goods to continue the oil economy of Venezuela. US sanctions blocked him receiving those needed goods, so Russia sent through particularly Rosneft, filled a tanker. I think they might have filled it in South Africa, and then they sailed across. They arrived in Venezuela, propping up the economy as well. In 2014, Russian troops start getting observed in Sudan as well as in Libya. They now have Russian troops on the ground as well as their financial support. We won't go into all that happened in 2019 in these countries. It was done in Australia, as I said earlier, December last year, 2019. It was also done in Kenya over December and January of 2019. But all of this relates to the Battle of Raphia, which was a fight between North and South over a sphere of influence separate to themselves. That was Eastern Front, solid Eastern Front. Raphia was not an internal civil war. That is just a few of the spheres of influence. You could also speak about last year's efforts by Putin to influence many countries throughout Africa with his first Russian-African summit. We could speak about Ukraine, his efforts in Ukraine last year. But last year, Vladimir Putin had major victories through all of the spheres of influence that we have mentioned. and others. It fulfilled the Battle of Raphia. I need to come back to my Zoom meeting. I'm not sure how to do that.
Close share. Just at the top.
Stop share?
Stop share.
Okay. Oh, now I'm big. That's scary. What I wanted us to see, is that these things were fulfilled. Everything else that we expected to see fulfilled in 2019, we have visibility of, except November 9 itself. We expected the Battle of Raphia. I'm suggesting that was fulfilled. We're expecting an impeachment that was fulfilled. We were expecting the restraint of radical Islam that was fulfilled. What we don't understand is November 9, but we know what we're looking for. It's internal civil war. You do not see the King of the South visible at that waymark. Someone has asked the question, the Battle of Panium, which is in its own history was also over Coal Syria, will it occur in the year 2021 and not at a date? I'm saying yes. You can already see the build up to that. In Libya, in the last few months, how is Haftar doing? Badly. End of last year, he had made major advancements. He was winning. By the time you come to the last few months, he has had to pull right back. And they're also suggested that Vladimir Putin has already started needing to remove troops out of Libya. Yemen is struggling. Venezuela, Maduro is struggling more than ever before. Syria, there are new sanctions on Assad. His internal loyalty, even within his own family, is crumbling. You can already see Vladimir Putin begin to lose his grip on these spheres of influence. So yes, we should be watching these external events. But there's other reasons that we should be watching these external events. And the reason for that is empathy. If I was to be actively protesting right now, I honestly don't know what I would protest for. I'd have to stand in front of our parliament. I don't know how big that board would need to be. Go and look at what's happening in these countries. Look up Obama's Predator drone program, what he did in Pakistan, in Libya, in Yemen, in Syria with these drone strikes. An article was put up on the media broadcast last night, Australian time. It spoke about these US military strikes through Syria, what they were able to investigate and reveal was that the civilian death toll, the innocent civilians killed by mistakes made in these strikes, whether by aircraft or drone, was 31 times the official number. What this article does is take you through the stories of the people that lived in these countries, the survivors who continue to live in the wreckage of these countries, and read what has been done, not just by the United States and by Russia, by their own dictatorships, by Assad, by the influence of Saudi Arabia and Iran. Any attempt to make this earthly kingdom better, I think we would see as the hopeless cause that it is. It's like someone described to me a hose with a leak. You want to put your thumb over that leak and 3 more burst open. It's horrific to read about these innocent lives Part of the reason that FFA could not understand the Battle of Raphia last year and understand these spheres of influence is because the FFA worldview is Libya who? Libya where? Who cares about what's happening in Yemen? Who even knows where to find Yemen on a map? It's that nationalistic worldview that places an importance of the lives and citizens of one country over the lives and citizens of another country that causes their blindness to see the external events correctly. They calculated, I think it was in Pakistan, I think it was last year, I will have to double check, that last year the United States killed more innocent civilians in Pakistan than the Taliban. The United States is supposed to be there to free them from the Taliban. They're killing more innocent people. So are they there for the Taliban or not? If you go back and you read their stories, it hurts. But when you do that, when you understand the degree of pain, you will understand why this movement and the setting up of another kingdom is the only hope that this world has. I know it hurts. Part of the reason that we're hurting is because people have finally seen the need to be vaccinated. We should not need to be vaccinated against the pain that we feel ourselves. I know what it feels like to live in a sexist movement that belongs to a sexist church, in a sexist country, in a sexist society that has practiced sexism for 6,000 years, justified by the Word of God, and called it a positive good. I know what that is like. I know what it's like to feel abuse from that. I don't need vaccination for my own pain. When you need vaccination, it's because there is something separate to your own experience, separate to what you feel in your own gender, in the own colour of your skin, in your own country and nationalism, to look outside and see the pain of somebody else. We need to be able to do that broadly. I will have more confidence in the direction people are taking in this movement when I see them post the stories of the innocent lives lost in Pakistan and Syria and Libya and Yemen and Venezuela because of both internal dictatorships, internal problems. When we speak about India, what that Hindu nationalistic government is doing to the Muslim population, what did they just do in Kashmir? What did Israel just do in the West Bank? This is the vaccination, the pain that is outside of the things that we feel ourselves. It is universal. It is global in its context now. And when we can see and feel that to the degree that we should, the value of a life in Syria, when his entire body is smashed up, when he just lost his wife and his daughter and his son, normal people, because an American drone said, there's an ISIS compound nearby, this house looks good enough, essentially, watching them rebuild their bodies and their lives without their family members. We should have that degree of vaccination. When we truly see that, it hurts. But we will not be tempted to remove ourselves from this movement because we will recognize the only hope that these innocent people have in countries where this movement doesn't even have a single representing priest will be that we set them up a kingdom they can join. They don't have that hope in their own countries. We're setting up a kingdom for their sakes, not for our own sakes. A kingdom where a woman in Yemen, a man in Syria, a family in Pakistan can find a home, where they can find proper treatment, where people do not have the freedom to hurt each other. That's the kingdom that we're setting up. It comes with restrictions of freedom. Because if there was no restrictions, people would abuse their power. That's the kingdom we need to focus on. Tomorrow we'll come back together and we'll discuss more of that kingdom. If you kneel with me, we will close in prayer. Dear Father in heaven, we know at the cross what killed Christ, what hurt his heart more than anything else, was bearing the sin of the whole world. We look at our experience now. Lord, in a parable sense, we're to do that. We're to look at the sin of the whole world, and it hurts. It breaks our hearts. It's universal, global. We see the suffering and the pain. Lord, may we see the hope that is in this movement, that is in the setting up not just of a church, but a kingdom. Not just a church, but what will also be a state, a place that people can live with freedom, that they won't fear Obama's predator drones over their heads in the sky where they can't even see them, that they won't live in such fear, that there will be no ISIS fainting women who faint at the sight of anything that reminds them of what they endured, where genital mutilation in South Sudan, where women bleed to death, that will no longer be practiced because you have rules. May we be willing to abide in a country that does not practice freedom to hurt, freedom to abuse. We don't understand sin as you do. Whatever restrictions you desire to place on us to bring us to this kingdom, may we accept, because you are wise, you see all, we do not. So if you tell us to do something that we don't want to do, that we feel violates our freedom, may we trust our eyes, your eyes, and not our own. That's what it means to let go of every earthly support and trust you, as you are revealed in parable teaching. Lord, we are in a crisis in this movement. This vaccination process hurts. It hurts to bear the sin of the whole world, and it's nothing compared to what Christ personally had placed upon him. But we are required to have our eyes open and see it. I pray that every head bowed, those, Lord, who did not stay and finish watching, those who have left, those who will no longer watch, oh Lord, I pray that they might be saved, that they might join with us in that kingdom. May we do everything in our power to convince them of the right way. I pray this in Jesus' name. Amen.